The story of our modern world is often told through engines. The roar of the steam engine, the hum of the electric motor, the silent processing of the computer chip. But that story is incomplete. The true engine of the world was not built of iron or steam or on silicon wafers. It was the world's first internet, a network made of metal, ink, and paper. And when its inventor, Johannes Gutenberg, unleashed it upon the world, about 1440, his ideas went viral. This is the story of how that 15th century technology became a root cause of the Industrial Revolution, toppled empires, rewrote the law, and accidentally created our modern age. It's a story that sketches a line from a German goldsmith to the globalized, industrialized capitalism that defines today's age. The Industrial Revolution happened when, where, and how it did because of the communicative revolution sparked by a single machine. This technology acted as a catalyst for the social, political, and economic factors that other explanations point to as a direct cause of our modern age. First, some background on the printing press itself and the proximate factors often credited with causing the Industrial Revolution. Then we'll examine how the press was a necessary precondition for each of these factors. Finally, we'll explore why this technology, though available across Eurasia, had a uniquely transformative effect in Europe, and specifically in Britain. The metal movable type printing press was developed by the German goldsmith Johannes Gutenberg around 1440. While woodblock printing had existed for centuries in China and Europe, Gutenberg's invention was twofold. He introduced movable type to Europe, and he perfected a hand press and mold system. This system allowed a single master impression of a character to cast durable, identical, and easily reproducible metal type. The process of setting a page to print became drastically simpler and faster. The effect was immediate, and it was profound. Gutenberg's technique spread like fire across the continent. A book that once took a scribe a year to copy could be produced 1,000 times over. The price collapsed, but the falling price of a book was not the most visible tremor of the earthquake to come. An object that was once a rare treasure, chained to a desk in a monastery, could now be owned by a merchant. This shift in access could do more than just spread knowledge. It would destabilize the very foundations of power. The first foundation to crack was the political one. The printing press was a tool of both dissension and control. In China, the press was used to disseminate Confucian ideology, strengthening cultural uniformity for centuries. The European experience was different. Europe's landscape was politically fragmented, and this predated the press. The significance of the press was that it allowed ideas to transcend borders. An intellectual or a dissident in an oppressive state could now have their work published in another nation. This removed immense barriers to knowledge production and greatly increased the durability of new ideas. This process allowed innovation to accumulate, forming the basis of what scholars call the Industrial Enlightenment. A competitive market of ideas emerged in Europe with many buyers and sellers. Competition within the printing industry was instrumental to its growth and success. A successful ruler benefited from having a local press to incentivize intellectual production and compete with rival powers. A competitive market of ideas was born, but the ideas to build an economy, they needed a stable system in which to operate. An idea has no economic value without a contract to commercialize it or a property right to protect it. The next revolution triggered by the press was not one of open dissent, but of silent, objective order, the creation of modern law. Common law built on the foundation of precedent, but before print, that foundation was sand. A judge in one town relied on a legal record that was copied by hand, full of a scribe's unique errors and omissions. A judge in the next town relied on a different version with different errors. The law was a whisper, changing with each retelling. Print turned that whisper into an unchanging, objective text. This was the birth of legal objectivity. The authority of the law no longer resided in the fallible, fading memory of an aging judge. It now resided in a physical object, a printed book, identical in London, York, and Canterbury. Authority shifted from a text to a person. The stability encouraged people to settle disputes in state courts rather than the socially contingent customs and mores that dominated oral and scribal societies in the form of gossip, shaming, and informal arbitration. The story of John Huntridge, a commoner accused of deer poaching in 1725, illustrates this point perfectly. The ruling Whig Party, including the Prime Minister Robert Walpole himself, put immense pressure on the court to return a guilty verdict. A conviction would have affirmed the power of the elite to override a citizen's property and economic rights. Yet a jury found Huntridge innocent based on procedural issues. This retreat of royal absolutism, replaced by the primacy of law without exception, is hard to imagine without the print revolution's substantial contribution towards an efficient, objective, and accessible legal system. The printing press gave direct rise to the concept of intellectual property. The press was the first mass production process. This created a new problem: the unauthorized reproduction of work. To solve this, some of the first patents were granted to printers. As early as 1469, a printer named John de Spira received exclusive printing rights in Venice. For 5 years, Venice became the first Western state to provide legal protection for inventors. Scholars note that this marked a crucial conceptual shift. Early patents protected physical machines, but print required protection for something new: immaterial ownership. An author does not simply own the paper or binding of a book, they own the representation of the ideas within it. When John de Spira died, Venice began to award copyrights to individual books, rather than a privilege on the entire printing press. The very word copyright is itself a product of the English Stationers' Company, a printers' guild, internal regulation on the right of copy of individual works in the mid-16th century. The historian Elizabeth Ethenstein summarizes the connection. The terms plagiarism and copyright did not exist for the minstrel. It was only after printing that they began to hold significance for the author. An exclusive right transformed the anonymous artisan into the eponymous inventor. The third major area of impact was religion. The Protestant Reformation is one of the most cited socio-cultural causes of the Industrial Revolution, an idea most associated with the sociologist Max Weber. Nearly all historians agree that the printing press was fundamental to the Reformation's success. The theological arguments made by Martin Luther were not new. His movement succeeded because the new print technology allowed for the mass production and dissemination of his anti-papal writings. Quantitative analysis has shown that cities with competitive media markets were significantly more likely to adopt Protestant ideas and undergo institutional change. The Protestant emphasis on individual interpretation of Scripture also changed the culture around literacy. Individuals were now compelled to learn to read the Bible in both Latin and their vernacular language. The durability of print also created a crisis of legitimacy for the church. This cycle of delegitimization freed individuals from the religious constraints on economic activity and wealth, such as the prohibitions on lending at interest and the imposition of tithes. The press had given people a reason to read and the tools to question religious authority. But what happens when that same tool is used to scrutinize the natural world with the same intensity? The result was a shift from faith in the divine to faith in human reason, a movement we call the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment and the scientific revolution were key predecessors to the Industrial Revolution, characterized by a knowledge economy and humanist ideals championed by thinkers like Galileo, Newton, and Kant. Central to these events was the idea of progress, which is inseparable from the cumulative knowledge that print enabled. Print shifted society from a backwards-looking reverence for ancient texts to a forward-looking ideal of material and intellectual improvement. Transnational intellectual networks like the Republic of Letters, composed of writers, scientists, and philosophers, relied on print to share and preserve their contributions. The falling price of books lowered the cost of education, increasing the total number of individuals who might use a foundation of cumulative knowledge to make their own breakthrough. Fifth, the press fostered a new culture of commercialism. The numerical revolution accompanied the print revolution, and print was instrumental in the development of modern management and accounting. The first printed work on double-entry bookkeeping was the Summa de Arithmetica, published in 1494. The wide availability of affordable business manuals was a necessary precondition for an educated and respected class of business owners. The very first mathematical books printed in Europe were commercial arithmetics, designed specifically for merchants. Sixth, print changed humanity's concept of geography. The cartographic revolution in the 16th century was a direct result of print. In the late 15th century, the press increased the total number of maps by a factor of 38-fold. In 1481, a new edition of Geographica with over 30 updated maps was published. Works like this ignited curiosity about the outside world and were instrumental in developing the core periphery structure of global trade and the European colonial project. These interconnected revolutions in politics, law, religion, and science explain the press's power in Europe, but this raises a critical question, an objection that must be answered. China invented mobile type centuries earlier. Why did the same cascade of events not happen there? The answer lies not in the technology, but in the shape of the words it was designed to print and the structure of the society that used it. First, Europe's languages are based on a small alphabet of roughly 50 characters. The Chinese logographic system contains over 80,000 unique characters. This made the Chinese printer's job exponentially more difficult. A European printer could rearrange the existing type to form new words, but a Chinese printer had to cast entirely new type for new concepts. This created a literal disincentive to publish new ideas and contributed to the printing of a much smaller range of texts in China compared to Europe. The second reason is political. Europe was politically fragmented, while China was politically centralized. In Europe, the press helped maintain a competitive balance of power by spreading technology and ideas widely. In China, the state used the press as a tool to fortify a single, homogeneous, Neo-Confucian ideology. There was no market power of relations to challenge the state's monopoly. The final part of the puzzle is the little divergence, why the Industrial Revolution was specifically British. The press had spread across the continent, with presses in England by the late 15th century. The divergence was not about the presence of printing, but about how it manifested. England's dominance in overseas trade was a key factor. This was uniquely enabled by a shift in their printing materials. English and Dutch mapmakers began producing atlases that emphasized the accuracy of trade routes over ornate and costly details. This practical focus enabled the efficient transport of goods and contributed to the success of the nation's respective joint stock companies. Religion also played a unique role in England. After the English Reformation, a significant number of dissenters from the Church of England founded their own dissenting academies. These schools, often located near printing houses, provided practical and vocational education. Crucially, the students of these academies were disproportionately the entrepreneurs, innovators, and intellectuals who drove the industrialization of England. The movable type printing press was a necessary, deep cause of the British Industrial Revolution. According to Sir Francis Bacon, the father of the scientific method, he said we should esteem not only experiments with immediate use, but, quote, those principally which are of most universal consequence for invention of other experiments, and those which give more light to the invention of causes. The printing press was the ultimate experiment of this kind. It was not a proximate cause, but the underlying mechanism that enabled the legal, political, cultural, and economic shifts that followed. It created a durable, cumulative body of knowledge. It standardized law and commerce. It shattered information monopolies and fueled dissent. It created the very concept of intellectual property. It changed how we see the world and our place in it. The story of the modern world is one of standing on the shoulders of giants. The printing press gave us a library where their work was stored, preserved, and shared for all to see.